Hello, everyone, and a really big welcome, especially to Mr. Martin's IB biology class.
Hi there.
We know biology can sometimes feel like, well, a lot of information.
Uh-huh.
But today, in this deep dive, we're going to break down some really key ideas about how your amazing body keeps everything running smoothly on the inside. Hopefully make it a bit clearer.
That's the plan. Think of it as getting a look, behind the scenes. Your body does this incredible job staying stable internally.
Right.
You've been learning about this, and we want to dig just a bit deeper into maintaining those stable conditions. So crucial for us humans.
Exactly. We'll be zeroing in on how your body handles things like, say, temperature and blood sugar levels, keeping them in that just right zone.
Yeah, that normal range.
And why that's so important. We'll also touch on what happens when these systems don't quite work right, like with diabetes.
The sources we've looked at give a fantastic view of these processes. Really fascinating stuff.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, so first things first, what exactly is homeostasis? Let's start there.
Okay, simply put, homeostasis is just your body's way of keeping its internal environment steady, stable.
Like keeping things on an even keel?
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
Even if the outside world changes drastically, like it gets super hot or freezing cold, your body is working constantly to keep the inside consistent.
Okay.
The analogy I like is a thermostat in a house.
Oh.
If the room gets too cold, the thermostat senses it and tells the heating to turn on, right? To bring the temperature back up to where you set it.
That's a really helpful way to think about it. So in our bodies, what sort of things are being kept steady like that?
Well, there are quite a few key variables. The big ones include your body temperature, obviously.
Right.
Also, the pH of your blood, how acidic it is, the concentration of glucose, sugar in your blood,
Okay.
and the osmotic concentration of your blood, too, basically the balance of water and solutes.
So these things have like a target range, a sweet spot where they need to stay for everything to work best.
Precisely. We call these targets set points. For body temperature, for instance, the set point is generally around 37 degrees Celsius, and your body functions most efficiently, all its little processes work best, when these variables are kept within those specific limits.
And these set points, are they fixed? Like always the same number?
Good question. Not necessarily. They can actually shift a bit.
Oh.
Yeah, factors like age or illness can change them. For example, sometimes older individuals might have a slightly higher baseline blood pressure.
Okay.
Or think about a fever. When you're sick, your body deliberately raises its temperature set point to help fight infection.
Ah, so it's an intentional change then. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So why is it so vital? What's the big deal about keeping everything so constant inside?
The main benefit really is allowing all the body's processes to function optimally, at their best.
Oh, so.
Well, think about enzymes. These are proteins that act like tiny catalysts, speeding up all the chemical reactions needed for life.
Right, we've learned about those.
They're very picky. They work best within really narrow temperature and pH ranges.
Yeah.
So by keeping the internal environment stable, homeostasis, the body ensures these vital reactions can happen efficiently.
Got it. So our bodies are constantly adjusting. How do they do that? What's the system?
It's mainly through something called feedback loops. These are like the body's internal control systems.
Feedback loops. Okay.
They detect deviations, like if something drifts too high or too low, and then they trigger responses to bring it back into the correct range.
Can you break down how a feedback loop works, the different parts?
Sure. Let's talk about negative feedback, because that's the main mechanism for homeostasis.
Okay, negative feedback.
It has a few core components. First, there's a stimulus. That's just a change that pushes a variable away from its set point, like your body temperature dropping.
Right.
Then you need a receptor. This is what detects the change, the stimulus.
So it senses the temperature drop.
Exactly. The receptor then sends information to a control center. Often this is part of the brain, like the hypothalamus we'll talk about later.
Okay, brain gets the message.
The control center compares the information it received to the set point, the ideal value. It figures out, okay, we're too low, and then it sends out instructions.
Instructions to
An effector. An effector is usually a muscle or a gland that actually carries out the response.
the part that does something.
Yes. The effector's action is designed to counteract the original stimulus and bring the variable back to the set point. So if you're cold, the effector might trigger shivering.
So it's like a cycle. Change happens, it's detected, a decision is made, and an action corrects it.
You've got it. And the key thing about negative feedback is that the response reverses the initial change. Too hot, mechanisms kick in to cool you down. Too cold, mechanisms warm you up, always trying to get back to that set point.
Back to balance. You said negative feedback. Is there like a positive feedback too?
Yes, there is positive feedback, but it works very differently.
How so?
Instead of reversing the change, positive feedback amplifies it, makes it stronger.
Oh, okay. That doesn't sound very stable.
Generally, it's not used for maintaining homeostasis for that reason. It pushes things further away from the set point.
So when is it used?
There are specific, necessary cases. A classic example is during childbirth. The hormone oxytocin causes uterine contractions, and these contractions stimulate the release of more oxytocin, making the contractions even stronger. That's needed to complete the process.
I see. So useful sometimes, but not for the day-to-day balancing act.
Precisely. Homeostasis relies almost entirely on negative feedback.
Okay, great distinction. Let's make this more concrete. How about regulating blood glucose or blood sugar? How does that work? It's a classic example, isn't it?
It really is, and it's beautifully controlled, mostly by hormones from the pancreas.
The pancreas, okay.
What's neat is the pancreas acts as both the receptor, sensing the glucose levels, and the control center, deciding which hormone to release. Very efficient.
Wow, okay. So what happens if, say, you've just eaten a meal and your blood sugar goes up?
Right. When blood glucose levels rise, specific cells in the pancreas, called beta cells, detect this increase.
Beta cells. Got it.
In response, they release the hormone insulin into the bloodstream.
Insulin. And what does insulin do?
Insulin basically acts like a key. It signals to cells, particularly in your muscles, liver, and fat tissue, to unlock their doors and take up glucose from the blood.
Ah, so it moves the sugar out of the blood and into the cells.
Exactly. This uptake by the cells lowers the glucose level in the blood, bringing it back down towards the normal set point.
Okay. And what about the flip side? What if your blood sugar drops too low? Maybe you haven't eaten in a while.
If blood glucose falls too low, a different set of cells in the pancreas, the alpha cells, sense that.
Alpha cells this time.
Yes. And they release a different hormone called glucagon.
Glucagon, okay.
Glucagon's main target is the liver. It tells the liver to break down its stored form of glucose, which is called glycogen.
Stored sugar, basically.
Yep. Break down glycogen and release the resulting glucose back into the bloodstream. This raises blood sugar levels back up towards the set point.
So insulin lowers blood sugar and glucagon raises it. They work together, like a team.
A very finely tuned team, constantly making adjustments to keep blood glucose within that healthy range.
That's really clear. But as we mentioned earlier, this system doesn't always work perfectly. That brings us to diabetes, right?
Exactly. Diabetes mellitus is actually a group of diseases where the core problem is having blood sugar levels that are too high over a long period. This disrupts homeostasis significantly.
And there are different types.
The two main ones we usually focus on are type 1 and type 2 diabetes.
Okay, let's start with type 1. What's the mechanism there?
Type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease. That means the body's immune system, which normally fights off infections, mistakenly attacks its own cells.
Which cells?
In this case, it attacks and destroys those insulin-producing beta cells in the pancreas.
Oh, the ones we just talked about.
The very same. So if the beta cells are destroyed, the body can't make enough insulin, or sometimes any insulin at all.
And without insulin.
Without insulin, glucose can't get from the blood into the cells properly, so sugar builds up in the blood to high levels.
What causes this attack? Or who gets it?
The exact trigger isn't fully known, but genetics plays a role. Having a family history increases risk, and it often develops relatively early in life, in children or young adults.
What are the effects, the symptoms?
Well, you get high blood glucose, obviously. Glucose might spill into the urine. People often experience increased urination, extreme thirst. They might get infections more easily. Sores might heal slowly, and they often feel very tired.
And the treatment?
Since the body isn't making insulin, the treatment is to replace it. People with type 1 diabetes need to take insulin regularly, usually by injection or using an insulin pump.
Right. That sounds like a major life adjustment. What about type 2 diabetes? How is that different?
Type 2 is much more common, actually, and it's a bit different. It's considered a chronic metabolic disorder.
Oh.
In type 2, the pancreas usually does still produce insulin, at least initially. The problem is that the body's cells don't respond to it properly. They become resistant.
Insulin resistance. So the key is there, but the lock is jammed.
That's a good way to put it. The insulin is present, but the cells aren't listening to its signal effectively. So glucose still has trouble getting into the cells, and blood sugar rises.
What makes someone more likely to develop type 2?
The risk factors are often linked to lifestyle. Things like being overweight or obese, not getting much physical activity, having non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Family history plays a role here too.
And the symptoms, are they the same?
They can be quite similar to type 1, the thirst, urination, fatigue, but often type 2 develops much more slowly, sometimes over years, and the symptoms might be milder at first or even go unnoticed for a while.
Can type 2 be prevented or managed differently?
Yes, absolutely. Because lifestyle factors are so important, making changes like getting regular exercise, eating a healthy, balanced diet, and maintaining a healthy body weight can significantly reduce the risk of developing type 2 and are key parts of managing it if someone already has it.
So lifestyle changes are really crucial.
Hugely important. Sometimes medication is also needed to help improve insulin sensitivity or manage blood sugar, and in some cases, people with type 2 might eventually need insulin therapy too.
So it seems both types lead to that same end result. Too much sugar circulating in the blood. And you mentioned earlier this affects blood osmotic concentration. What does that mean, simply?
Basically, having a lot of dissolved sugar in your blood changes the water balance. It makes the blood more concentrated, which can pull water out of your cells and affect how tissues function. It throws off that delicate fluid balance.
Okay, I see how that disrupts things.
Mm.
Right, let's shift gears to another big example of homeostasis, keeping our body temperature steady. Thermoregulation. How do we manage that, staying around 37 degrees Celsius?
Thermoregulation is another fantastic showcase of negative feedback. Your body has specialized temperature sensors called thermoreceptors.
Thermoreceptors, where are they?
You have them in your skin. These are called peripheral receptors, sensing the outside temperature. And you also have them deeper inside your body in the core, monitoring your internal temperature.
Skin and core.
These receptors constantly send information about temperature to the control center for thermoregulation, which is a part of your brain called the hypothalamus.
Ah, the hypothalamus again, our internal thermostat.
Exactly right. The hypothalamus processes this temperature information. If it detects your temperature is deviating from the set point, it sends out signals to various effectors to correct it.
The effectors again, the parts that take action. What kind of effectors are involved in temperature control?
There's a whole range. Let's see, sweat glands are a big one.
Right, sweating cools you down.
Yep, when you're hot, they secrete sweat. As it evaporates from your skin, it takes heat with it, cooling you. When you're cold, sweating stops to conserve heat.
Makes sense. What else?
Your thyroid gland can play a role. If you get cold, the hypothalamus can signal the thyroid to release more thyroxine, a hormone that boosts your overall metabolic rate.
So you generate more heat internally.
Exactly. More chemical reactions happening generates more heat. There's also special fat tissue called brown adipose tissue or brown fat.
Brown fat.
Yeah, it's specialized in generating heat directly by breaking down fat, a process sometimes called uncoupled respiration.
Interesting.
And of course, your muscles are effectors. When you get cold, they start contracting rapidly and involuntarily. That's shivering. All that muscle activity generates a lot of heat.
Ah, shivering. Okay.
Then there are your blood vessels, specifically the ones near the skin surface.
How they help?
When you're hot, these blood vessels widen. That's vasodilation. More blood flows near the surface, allowing heat to radiate away from your body into the cooler surroundings.
Okay.
And when you're cold, these same vessels constrict or narrow. That's vasoconstriction. This reduces blood flow to the skin, keeping warmer blood deeper inside your core and reducing heat loss.
Vasodilation to cool, vasoconstriction to warm. Got it. Any others?
Well, there's hair erection goosebumps. Tiny muscles attached to hair follicles contract, making the hair stand on end.
Does it actually help us?
In furry animals, it traps a layer of insulating air close to the skin. For us relatively hairless humans, not so much anymore. It's more of a leftover response.
Huh. Okay. So it seems like a whole coordinated effort. Are these all automatic responses? Or do we consciously do things too?
It's both. The things we just discussed, sweating, shivering, vasodilation, constriction, those are physiological, involuntary responses controlled by the hypothalamus.
Automatic.
Right. But we also perform behavioral thermoregulation. Conscious actions like putting on a jacket when you feel cold, seeking shade when hot, or huddling for warmth. Humans rely a lot on behavior, but these physiological mechanisms are constantly working too.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, one more area to touch on briefly. Blood flow. Does the same amount of blood go everywhere all the time?
No, definitely not. The distribution of blood flow to different organs changes quite dramatically depending on the body's needs at that moment. It's another form of regulation, ensuring resources go where they're most needed.
Can you give some examples, like comparing sleep versus activity?
Sure. Let's think about skeletal muscles, the gut, the brain, and the kidneys. During sleep, when you're resting deeply,
Yeah.
your skeletal muscles don't need much blood flow, so it's quite low. The gut's blood flow depends. If you ate before sleeping, it might be higher for digestion.
Okay.
The brain, interestingly, stays quite active during sleep, so it receives a relatively high and steady blood flow. Kidneys, however, get less blood flow during sleep compared to when you're awake.
Right. What about just resting, but awake,
Yeah.
like sitting quietly?
During wakeful rest, blood flow to skeletal muscles is moderate. Again, gut flow depends on recent meals. Brain activity is moderate, so blood flow is moderate. But here's the interesting bit. This is when your kidneys get maximal blood flow.
Really? Why then?
It's prime time for them to filter your blood, remove waste products, and manage fluid balance. They get about a quarter of your total cardiac output during rest.
Wow. Okay. Now, what about intense exercise, like going for a run?
Big changes happen then. Skeletal muscles are working hard, so blood flow there increases massively. They need lots of oxygen and fuel.
Makes sense.
At the same time, blood is shunted away from the digestive system. Digestion isn't the priority right then, so gut blood flow decreases significantly.
Okay. Brain and kidneys.
The brain needs to coordinate everything so its blood supply remains high, but blood flow to the kidneys decreases, similar to during sleep. The body prioritizes muscles and the brain during heavy activity.
And the shifting of blood that's using the vasodilation and vasoconstriction we talked about.
Exactly. Blood vessels supplying active muscles dilate to increase flow, while vessels supplying less active areas like the gut constrict to reduce flow. It's all carefully orchestrated.
Amazing how dynamic it all is. Now, just to connect a couple of these ideas, why do organisms fundamentally need to move materials like oxygen and energy around their bodies?
Well, it boils down to survival and function. Every single cell needs a constant supply of materials, oxygen for respiration, nutrients for building blocks, and energy like glucose.
Right.
These need to be delivered so cells can perform all their jobs. Growing, repairing, moving, communicating, and critically, maintaining that internal balance homeostasis that we've spent this whole time discussing. And equally important, waste products need to be carried away.
Makes sense. And the second linking question, we talked a lot about temperature. What biological systems are especially sensitive to getting too hot or too cold?
Oh, many systems are temperature sensitive. Enzymes are probably the prime example we already mentioned.
Yeah, they have that optimal temperature.
Exactly. Too cold, and the reaction rates slow right down. Too hot, and they can denature, change shape permanently, and stop working altogether. Beyond individual enzymes, entire metabolic pathways, the sequences of chemical reactions in cells are temperature dependent because they rely on those enzymes. Ultimately, the proper functioning of cell membranes, nerve impulses, muscle contractions, pretty much all vital processes can be disrupted if body temperature strays too far from the optimal range.
This has been incredibly helpful, really tying these concepts together.
Yeah.
So just to wrap up, what are the absolute key points everyone listening, especially Mr. Martin's class, should take away?
Okay, the big ideas. Homeostasis is all about keeping the internal environment stable and balanced. A dynamic equilibrium despite external changes.
Dynamic equilibrium. Nice.
Negative feedback loops are the main mechanism the body uses. They detect changes and trigger responses that oppose those changes, bringing things back to the set point.
Like the thermostat.
Exactly. And we saw this in action with blood glucose regulation, insulin and glucagon working in opposition.
Right.
And also with thermoregulation, sweating, shivering, blood vessel changes, all working to keep temperature stable.
And understanding these processes is fundamental, isn't it? It shows how essential this balance is for the body to just work.
Absolutely essential. It's the foundation for health and proper function. Getting these concepts down is key for understanding so much else in biology.
Well, to Mr. Martin's IB biology class, we sincerely hope this deep dive has helped illuminate how incredibly hard your body works, second by second, to maintain that crucial internal balance.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing when you think about it.
We really encourage you to think more about how these systems interact. Are there other variables controlled just as tightly? What are they?
And maybe ponder the why. What's the evolutionary advantage of developing these complex regulatory systems? It's a great question to explore.
Definitely food for thought. And to all our listeners, if you found this deep dive into homeostasis useful or interesting, please do give us a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and maybe leave a comment with any questions you still have.
We'd love to hear from you.
And please, tell your friends, tell your classmates about the deep dive. Understanding these core biological ideas really opens up a lot. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone.